All right, well, we do have a special guest with us here this evening. Garry Squires is one of our South Sound surveyors. He surveys at Burfoot Park, and he is a professional geologist and civil engineer with a bachelor's degree in geology from University of Aberdeen in Scotland. So he also has a master's degree in civil engineering from the University of Washington. And after retiring in 2017, with a career that included a mining geologist in Africa and 30 years as a geotechnical engineer consultant in the Pacific Northwest. So we're very lucky to have him down here, and he has some really interesting insights to share with us this evening about the PIGU reading bluffs. So welcome, Garry. Thank you so much for agreeing to speak to us this evening. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. Slideshow. Okay. There we go. Okay, so just let me know when you'd like me to advance the photos, Garry.
Sure. Okay, so you want me to go ahead?
Yep, take it away.
Okay, so this little impromptu presentation is kind of like a reprise of one that I did at Shannon's request a month or so ago to a smaller group. And it's essentially the same thing, only we've added some pictures because I was just talking at the previous one. But first photograph you see is Burfoot Beach, the project, the site that I've been a participant in monitoring with Bert and Cindy. I think I've been doing it for the last 6 or 7 years. Anyway, what I'm trying to do is just give you a perspective from a geologist standpoint to show you what you're looking at. You will have a different viewpoint, predominantly coming from a biologic, ecologic standpoint. I'm looking at the soil and what I see, and then making inferences or just comments about what that might mean or to the birds. So the first thing really is just to give you a general view of Puget Sound geology. It is dominated by the deposits left by the Vashon glaciation. Most of the deposits are of that age or younger. In some areas, there are older glacial deposits and non-glacial deposits, but Burfoot is in the latter category. It's mostly Vashon age. The sound is basically to describe glaciation. This may be familiar to several of the people in the audience, but maybe not everyone. But the Puget Sound Trough was filled with glacial deposits in the last ice age. I think it was about 30,000 years ago. And then the ice was at a maximum extent just south of Olympia. So these are all glacial deposits, and then the ice retreated and left these deposits behind. Some of the deposits were deposited in front of the glacier as it advanced. Others were compacted by the glacier while it was present, and other deposits were left by the glacier as it retreated. So in order, you have advance outwash, which is like a river gravel, sand and gravel deposit that is being deposited in front of the glacier as it gets colder during the ice age and the glacier advances. There is often a glacial till, which is not a water deposit. It is just advance outwash and other material that has been deposited in front of the glacier, and then the glacier overrides it and compacts it. And then when the ice melts, you still have meltwater coming off, and that lies on top of it. It also erodes the older deposits to some extent. So to relate that to the bluff you're seeing here, if you look at the about the mid slope, there's a color change from generally a gray color to a lighter brown up above. The gray is the advanced outwash. So in this particular bluff, there isn't a particularly significant thickness of glacial till. It's mostly advanced outwash with a thin over-consolidated silt layer, which may be interglacial. There may also be elements of till in it, but it is definitely over-consolidated, which means it's felt the weight of some ice. That's why, and it's compact and quite dense. The very top of the slope is a recessional outwash, and that's mostly a silty sand. So if you want to move to the next slide. This is the South Burrow. I didn't want to give them numbers because I know we give them different numbers per season, but this is the one, if you remember the first picture, it's to the right, far right is this burrow. And it is, you can see it just above the tree root, or sorry, just below the tree root. And it's in the recessional outwash. Right below it, you can see a brown layer. That is an over-consolidated sandy silt. It's stiff to hard. And that is probably, it looks like it's got some bedding to it. So it's not till. It looks like it might have been water deposited, but it's definitely been consolidated by the weight of ice. You want to make the next slide? This is the middle burrow in the middle of the profile, and the one that's actually being used is the upper one. The other one is just, maybe it'll be used by guillemots in the future, but the active one that we saw this season is the upper one, and it is in a different layer than the South Burrow. This is actually in that stiff over-consolidated silt layer, and that's a new one. Because for the first few years, the burrows that we saw were in the upper silty sand layer. I'm going to move to the next slide. That's just a distant shot of that. You can see above the burrows, you can see the silty sand. You might be able to notice that the slope actually flattens a bit above the burrows. That's because it's less dense. It is the recessional deposit, and it tends to erode and slough more. The over-consolidated silt is near vertical, and then underneath it is the advanced outwash, which is very dense. It's a very strong deposit, absent beach tidal erosion. And move on to the next one. That's just an overall look at the soil profile. You've got the advanced outwash. You can see it, that gray color, and then the brown silt layer in the middle, which is the level, the horizon the central burrows were in, and then you've got the recessional outwash at the very top, just underneath the tree roots there, which is the recessional outwash. And I think the last one, the next one, that's the advanced outwash. Oops, disappeared. Yeah, that's the advanced outwash, and you can see it's really coarse-grained. It's very dense, and it's not something that the birds will readily excavate into. It's just too hard and dense. So just to kind of step back from that, what I see as the engineer is the bluff, the hole, the South Burrow one is kind of marginal or threatened because it's in that looser silty sand, and there's a lot more seepage and potential for sloughing and loss of the burrow. And that has happened to several of the burrows at Burfoot over the years. The central burrow is in that stiff clay, silty clay. And I don't know if you can really tell from the scale, but they are smaller holes than the ones that we see in the upper silty sand, probably because it's more difficult to excavate. But from an engineer standpoint, I would expect those ones to last longer than the ones higher up in the profile, because it's much less likely to be destabilized. So I think that's about all I wanted to say. If you have any questions, or if there's something that was unclear, then please ask away.
Thank you, Gary.
Sure.
Now, you had mentioned when you spoke with us at South Sound about that lower portion of the bluff, the way it's being undercut.
Yes.
That's destabilizing, and then what that means for what's sitting above.
Right. That's a good point. The dense advance outwash is very, very, very strong in the absence of tidal erosion. It's a very dense deposit. It will stand at very steep angles, and as I said, it's very hard to dig it. But when you add water, tidal action, particularly king tides, which we get here, that actually contact that advance outwash, it is highly erodible. And what happens is it undercuts the stiff silt and clay that's above it. And you can actually, I've seen places along Johnson Point where you can, I wouldn't do it, it's dangerous, but you could, it extends, there's a little cave that extends several feet into the bank with the hard deposits above it. And you get these large occasional failures where big blocks of the very stiff silt will come down because they've been undercut by king tides. Normally, the deposits that are sloughing off the top, the recessional outwash, stay at the bottom and are slowly removed by the tides, but by tidal action. But when we have king tides, we can get this much more aggressive and rapid erosion at the toe of the slope, which eventually will cause some bluff failures.
It'd be interesting to do an analysis to see where most of our burrows occur within this bluff. Ed, I see you were raising your hand too.
Yeah. Gary, this is Ed from Clallam. We have several sites in Clallam that I would like to send you photos of.
Ed, we can barely hear you. Are you able to turn up your...
Sorry, unplugged here. Okay. Gary, this Ed from Clallam. We've had several sloughs of our bluffs at 2 of our sites. And if I send you photos, if you could interpret them as well. But one of our primary colonies a couple years ago, during our surveys, it actually had a major sloughing off going on, and it wiped off the major central colony, the burrow sites. But for geologically speaking, what we can expect in the future.
Yes, I agree. The sloughing that you see from the top, there are 2 areas. The erosion from my standpoint happens in 2 ways. It's surface erosion caused by runoff that's coming off the top of the slope, running down the slope, and that erodes usually at a fairly slow rate. But then you have these episodic events where undercutting at the toe can cause a rapid failure, something that you would see immediately as a large quantity, several feet sometimes of bank come down all of a sudden. The drivers of the first type of erosion, the more gradual, is water seeping into the slope, exiting on top of the glacial till, or the stiff silt, which is not very permeable, and you have a perched seep that weakens the face. It also exposes the face to freeze-thaw action, because if the soil is wet and seeping, when you have these cold snaps, it expands the soil And then when the ice, when it melts, soil is looser and weaker and then tends to slough. But that's like an ongoing, I would call it a slow process. You notice it, yeah, over many years, you see, well, yeah, that slope is flattened at the top, or there's a little bit of sloughing, you'll see some material at the bottom. Then we have this episodic large bank failure, which is not from the top down, it's from the bottom up. And that's the tidal action that is causing those kind of failures.
Okay, thank you.
You bet. But I think your point is well made. It would be interesting to look at where the burrows were in terms of which geologic horizon, and maybe someone could make an analysis to whether are the current burrows in different horizons to the burrows 20 years ago, or are we just looking at a different time scale? Because the life of a burrow, I don't know. You might, others in the group might have an idea, but from a geologist standpoint, they're instantaneous. I mean, we're looking at much longer time frames than the living species.
Yeah, just
Right.
not to belabor for Clallam, but the one Port William site in Clallam, that the major the central part of the major colony that was very populated had a major sloughing, and then the next 2 years, including this year, and our numbers are down, and the population is down because they don't have their bluff burrows that they had previously. So they just don't have a habitat anymore for the burrows.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've seen similar things happen at Burfoot. Like I said, the upper burrows near the top of the slope seem to erode more quickly, and some of them they just a foot or so of the bank sloughs off and it's gone. They won't use it anymore. I would anticipate that these newer burrows that we're seeing in the center, I would think, absent toe erosion, toe undercutting, those things should be there for a while.
Go ahead, Francis.
Thanks, Gary. That was really interesting. I guess my question really is, as far as the integrity of the burrow opening, are there certain layers where it won't erode within the burrow because it would be too loose? And are there certain layers? I mean, do the birds have to find a layer in there that is easily hollowed out, but then that won't collapse on them? I've often wondered why, when we see a perfectly good hole from the outside, it's not used inside.
Yeah, that's a good question. I would think that the silty sand, the recessional outwash at the top, it's exposed to the potential for groundwater seepage coming from above, and that could cause a cave-in behind the face, which might, the birds might not feel not like, or I think that's like a thing that is much more possible in the burrows that we see near the top of our Burfoot slope. It's a less likely situation in that mid slope, the central burrows I called it. Unless they're unlucky to find a little sand seam, I would expect those things will stay at their current size unless they dig more that you see now. Whereas the ones at the top of the slope, I think they might have started them off smaller, more like the size of the ones that we see in the mid slope, but they've gradually got bigger because it's more erodible material that can be fall of its own accord, or just by the activity of the birds. I don't know. It might not be a particularly strong cave to be in. It's also within the root zone.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've noticed that the burrows at the top of the bluff tend to be in the roots, which I'm guessing it's because that provides some structure, additional structure that might be needed in that looser
It could help,
Yeah.
yes. It could also hinder if you have wind action and the root gets pulled and moved by that could actually damage the burrow, I think.
Right. Yeah, so some interesting things to think about, especially now that we're having higher tides and with possible sea level rise,
Yes,
things to think about.
yeah,
The habitat.
sea level rise,
There's-
I think, will cause more undercutting. It's
Yeah.
and so you're likely to see an increased incidence of these instantaneous large bank failures. Several feet of soil in one area just come down just like that. And if a burrow's in above that, then it's going to be impacted.
Right.
And just one more thing on top of sea level rises or storm surges, which are also forecasted for the climate changes going on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that now this is the geologist speaking. I'm trying to put on the, well, yes, I'm looking at these birds. You know, I think it's hard to know whether that is a threat long term to the birds or not. It's certainly a short term threat. If you have your burrow in one area where it goes, like you just saw up at your colony, all at once gone. But there's plenty of other bluff they can reestablish, but it might, I guess, set them back a couple of 3 seasons because they got to find another and occupy another burrow, which I understand that the guillemots don't actually do the initial burrowing, they just take over someone else's work.
Right. Well, this could definitely be an interesting project for the future. And it's could be valuable that we have all of these site photos that we've been taking from year to year. And maybe that could be some students' project one of these years to look at our burrows and see if they
Yep.
can make some sense of that.
Yeah, I think that would be useful.
Could tell us a lot about how the birds are adapting to change and how change is affecting them. So thank you so much, Garry.
You're welcome.
We appreciate you taking time out of the day, and hopefully I didn't miss anybody. Did anyone else have questions? I can't see everyone. Bob did say he did send me a drone video of Port William, so that's true. Yeah, that would be great to look at that footage. I can send that to you too. So, all right. Well, thank you so much.
Okay, I'll let you go down with your other business.
All right. Take care.